The console generation is just getting started and gamers are still enjoying cross-generation games, or upgraded last-generation gaming experiences. Now, as developers are ready to break the boundaries of game design, hardware limitations, and fans' expectations, the focus is squarely on popular hardware, and someone wants to blame Xbox. But it's not what you think. Looking at the breadth of games that have come out over the past 2 years and since the emergence of the Xbox Series S and X, the promise of supporting cross-generation is nearly over. With that, it is also strikingly apparent that cross-generation also feels decidedly 1.5. More of the same, and now finally at 60 FPS. Eyes are on games like Gotham Knights and Plague's Tale Requiem, with developers seemingly unable to achieve 60 FPS on brand new Xbox consoles where there's plenty of power under the hood to make that happen. First, we need to look at how Xbox Series X and S consoles can run big open world games at 60 while developers are having a hard time making that target on the Series S. The graphics chip must be able to keep up with rendering shapes and images while the CPU processes animation and physics. Right now, the Series S CPU is much faster than its GPU. Matter of fact, most every game launching on the Xbox Series S can run at 60 to 120 FPS with very few exceptions. In the case of Gotham Knights, the developers chose to prioritize visuals, resolution, and cooperative physics, with many enemies taking calculated damage across the world, attacks and specials, with effects on screen increasing those processing demands. Put aside for a moment the obvious complaint that Gotham Knights doesn't look next-gen, and let's talk about how the optimization is poor and on-screen interaction has increased. In fact, right now, fans are worried because it seems developers may be prioritizing 30 FPS and cranked up visuals over the performance of 60 FPS on console. Look at Ninja Theory showcasing their game at 24 FPS, showing a realistic movie-like quality in gameplay, shown here in their example.
But how could we achieve this in a video game with an in-engine camera? We started by studying a range of anamorphic lenses and gathered calibration data using reference footage of a checkerboard. From this, we built NT Lens in Unreal, a game camera that accurately simulates the distortion, chromatic aberration, spherical aberration, and bokeh that makes these lenses so sought after in cinema. The result is subtle, but it goes a long way in achieving our vision for an immersive, cinematic experience.
But Ninja Theory won't just offer a 24 or 30 FPS gameplay presentation. They've offered performance on Hellblade on both versions on Xbox One and Xbox Series S and Xbox Series X. Developers have spoken out about the pains of Xbox Series S being the lowest powered platform that Microsoft requires to be supported. Recently, in an open forum broke out on social media, developers said studios have been through one development cycle where Series S turned out to be an albatross around the neck of production, and now that games are firmly being developed with new consoles in mind, teams do not want to repeat the process. Digital Foundry stated a collective response from several small developers. They said, "We've heard from multiple developers that they kind of feel like the Series S is a bit of a pain at times. Not the CPU or the GPU power there, but it's more like the memory constraints." Some developers have even claimed that the Xbox Series S is barely better than the Xbox One X, which is disingenuous and born out of frustration in an already difficult development environment. Let's talk about the lowest powered platform though. Normally the lowest common denominator is actually PC. Looking at some modern releases, minimum spec PC, the lowest hardware required to run the game according to developers, minimum spec is usually very close to the Xbox Series S, requiring a slower PC CPU and conventional storage and bandwidth. Gotham Knights' minimum specs requirement is an AMD RX 590, which in some aspects fairly equal to the Series S GPU, and the processor is some 12% faster in the Series S, requiring a Ryzen 7 CPU. One of the other spec requirements is RAM. where Series S struggles the most with a small memory pool of just 10 gigabytes of GDDR6 RAM, when 8 is actually required in the PC. Even Plague's Tale Requiem minimum specs call for a GTX 970 or an RX 590, 2018 GPUs, which is less than the Series S, and most of that demand is on the CPU with thousands of rats on screen. The Xbox Series S CPU is a 3.6 GHz with multi-threading and is superior and faster compared to the required AMD FX 8300. Speaking to hardware leads at Xbox, we have learned that games over the past decade have been more GPU bound, meaning reliant on graphics power, the VRAM to save on CPU loads for great visuals at 30 FPS on PS4 and Xbox One.
That actually came directly from feedback from developers. As a developer, it's really important to have those consistent, sustained performance because it just makes it that much easier to optimize and really tune your game for the performance of the hardware. If you have variable performance, it's harder because it's harder to predict. You know, you could be in a very intense firefight as an example, and then all of a sudden, like, the CPU gets overloaded, and then all of a sudden you're going to have hitches or frame drops or things like that. So across the entire architecture, we just really focus on that consistent, sustained performance so that as a developer, I know I'm always going to get the same GPU performance. I know I'm always going to get the same CPU performance.
Now, as we move into the next generation, games are still being built and finished with this design in mind, to save on CPU-intensive calculations to sell the game on older consoles. Even with new games like Starfield being built long into the Xbox One generation to pass many calculations and demands on the GPU, even with a fast new Xbox Series S processor in these consoles. So PC is the lowest common denominator, but let's talk about how Microsoft and Xbox are to blame for this pain of next generation hardware. First, the Xbox Series S and X are developed, ported, or just certified on an XDK, an Xbox Development Kit. Provided to game studios or developers as a console-like machine, they are sent, or even using PC specs to optimize for. The Xbox Series XDK has two modes that can be tested with ease to test the game on Xbox Series X or S, but there is a real problem. Speaking to developers working with the XDK and behind the scenes with Xbox's hardware team, the main problem is that Xbox dev kits are still wildly behind for support, instructional documentation, and Microsoft has told them that core RDNA 2 features are just not ready yet. Right now, none of the advanced hardware and software features marketed to devs and fans of games are being utilized, and most importantly, all of them are efficiency features to allow games to advance into next generation without compromising the look and feel of the games. Let's break them down and value what each would do for performance, knowing that Xbox Series console games are mostly pushing for high definition at 60 FPS with half-cocked ray tracing. Some of these features can mean the threshold of running a game at 60 instead of 30 FPS. The first one, VRS, variable rate shading, is an efficiency feature that selectively skips rendering objects and textures that are out of view of the player. This calculation can increase performance around 15%. VRS is a bespoke RDNA 2 feature available only in Xbox Series S and X consoles. FSR 2.0 is already supposed to be implemented into the consoles and even on Deathloop on Xbox. Fidelity Super Resolution is a software algorithm that increases the sharpness and quality of each frame to look above HD or even look like 4K, while saving the native rendering budget to be allocated for better frame rates. This alone can push a game to acceptable visuals from 30 to 60 FPS on Xbox Series S or X. Sampler feedback streaming is touted, the Xbox feature that is yet to be used in games. Sampler feedback streaming allows for continuous and intelligent loading and eviction of small texture tiles, ensuring that only the textures that are required are displayed at their highest quality. This gives way to higher quality assets than previously possible, making better use of the GPU memory. Games must compress and unpack large assets in real time and uses a large portion of the bandwidth of data that can hold back the budget for going to higher resolutions and especially higher frame rates. All of this is meant to be used in concert with things like VRS and FSR, and right now the consoles are barely using just the raw hardware. This is also why game install sizes on Xbox are still fairly large and growing. Velocity architecture in the Xbox Series S and X consoles enables developers to reimagine how to build their games. By combining a super-fast SSD, hardware decompression like we talked about with sampler feedback streaming, and the new direct storage functionality gives developers the tools to develop immersive experiences with minimal load times for players. Even now we see games load faster on Xbox Series consoles over the PS5. And devs are still getting used to these new consoles and the new dev kits. Now, let's address the concern that Microsoft should drop the requirement to support games on the Xbox Series S. Right now, if you create a game for the Xbox console, it must run on the X and the S. You cannot make a game for just the powerful Series X. This is almost like asking AMD and Nvidia hardware to be left behind if it's lower spec. Hardware that makes up the majority of gaming specs according to Steam hardware surveys on PC. Yes, the Xbox Series S has a low memory pool. The memory pool is 10 gigabytes of GDDR6 and minimum spec usually calls for only 8. The CPU is not only well above minimum specs, but it's actually in line with recommended specs for most big AAA games on PC. Right now, developers aren't even using simultaneous multi-threading, which is a core feature of the Xbox Series S CPU. Remember, developers are still knee-deep or just finishing creation of games that have been well in the works during the Xbox One generation, without the full power of this new generation in mind. The GPU could be the most glaring problem of the Series S, as it is slightly less powerful than the One X on paper, but the new architecture makes it nearly equal or more powerful for rendering. And remember that minimum spec PC calls for GPUs equal to the Series S already, and PC gamers can lower whatever settings they choose to bring VRAM demands down for performance. But developers don't have to do this work. They can set the hardware target and leave the optimization to the PC customer. They don't have that luxury on console. On Xbox Series S, they have to hit the hardware target and optimize exactly for that version of the game, while setting a standard of what resolution and frame rate the game should ship at. The bottom line is that developers have access to some 30 to 50% efficiency features in RDNA 2 with VRS, FSR, sampler feedback streaming, velocity architecture, all of which will help keep the game at 1080p on a Series S or even pushed up to look like 1440p while still running at 60. This also leaves enough room in the render budget to turn on things like ray tracing while keeping a sharp image and great performance. All of this also translates directly to the Xbox Series X, which has not seen a lot of real-time ray tracing while running at 60 FPS. This isn't the developer's fault and definitely isn't laziness, as the instruction, documentation, and tools available to them on the XDK have not been properly supported by Microsoft and the Xbox hardware team. We are 2 years into the console generation, and the hardware is barely being utilized. The developers are just starting to begin real next-generation development with increased processing and advanced features. And that means there is a lot of life left in the Xbox Series X. And believe it or not, the Xbox Series S isn't going anywhere. This is Colteastwood. Thank you so much for checking out this long and detailed and really in-depth video as I dove into what is going on with the Xbox Series S and X and RDNA 2 features that have been promised for 2 years. The generation has a long way to go, and I don't for a second believe that we are moving into a trend of 30 FPS. Digital Foundry says this could be a problem, but the developers are still much in the mindset of last generation. There is a lot more to be done, and we've yet to see anything this whole generation, I would say, any game that has really truly pushed the next generation boundaries. We have seen games like Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, but those games could have run on last generation consoles. There is still more to do, and everything we've seen thus far has been built a long time ago, knee-deep into last generation. If you end up enjoying this video, let me know by liking and subscribing to the channel. Hit the bell to be notified of new weekly content. And if you want to further support the work we're doing here on the channel, you can join the channel membership below or join the Patreon. Either of those will get you early access to videos before they go up and into monthly merch for giveaways. But it just shows your support for what we're doing, and there's really cool things to come, like the XC Club, which we're gaming on the Xbox console and party chat. Also, there is the XC podcast that runs every Monday night. We won't be there for Halloween, but we'll be there next week with a special co-host. This Gaz is out of the country. Who knows? He's probably going to get arrested. Can't wait. But anyway, thanks so much for checking out the video. I want to know what you think about 30 FPS. Well, I know what you think, but what do you think is going on with the new games? Where are we headed? If you have a Series S and it's your main console, do you mind the occasional 30 FPS game? Do you notice the game still run and look great? Let me know in the comments. I gotta hear your voice. Put it down below. And while you're there, remember, as always, please be nice.